My ability to trigger the woke has doubled since my last video. I got these bitches losing their minds. How? By using common sense. I saw this video posted by this guy named Jib Cody. Jib made this video about police brutality. I'll link to the video below. I got the clapback covered, that's what this video's for, so don't contact this person. He used dogs, golden retrievers and a Doberman, in place of white and black people. A cop pulls him over, gets the ID from a driver who's a retriever, and the cop eyeballs the driver, the two retrievers in the back, and then settles in on the Doberman. They stare at each other. The Doberman looks away, then back at the cop. The cop stares harder. His brow furrows. Then the driver pops his head in the way. The cop taps the ID, gives it back to the driver, and off they go. As they leave, the Doberman thinks about these retrievers playing in the park, in a school. Then there's cops' lights. And finally, those cop eyes. The driver looks at the Doberman, and we hear this rattling sound. It's one of the cups in the holder. It doesn't quite fit in. There's a propaganda message, and then the short film ends. Now, we all know what we're supposed to take from that short film. That cops be racist. The problem is that there's no context for that. Everything I've described is exactly what happens in the film. There's no context to show that this is supposed to be racist. We're meant to take it that way, that's clear from the message at the end of the film, but there's nothing in the film itself to convey that message. The cop and the Doberman just stare at each other. That's it. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, and I'm going to lay down one rule. You can only answer the questions based on what you see in the film. You can't use anything external, be it another film, real life experiences, current events, nothing but what's present in the film. Now, based solely on what's in the film, ask yourself, why do the cop and the Doberman stare at each other? Why does the Doberman look away? Why is he afraid? Why does the cop keep staring? Why does he look like he's suspicious of the Doberman? Why does the driver pop his head in the way? You probably can't answer those questions because the answers are nowhere to be found in the film. There's no context in the film to explain why any of this happens. All we have are two people staring at each other, and the viewer is told at the end in a message to perceive the cop's actions as racist. But if you play it out logically, you don't know why the cop stares. You don't know what the cop thinks. The cop could be racist, or an asshole, or confused by the Doberman's reaction, or recognize the Doberman and wonder why he's there, or think the Doberman is suspicious of him and be tense about that. All of that is a fair interpretation because the message is so poorly delivered. So I pointed this out on Twitter. I said, quote, "The injustice is that the cop looked at a dark dog? Is that it? You don't want to add in him asking for his ID, to make it look unreasonable?" I stand by that statement because, as it is, I don't see either the cop or the Doberman doing anything wrong. There's no context to explain why I should consider the cop racist. I'm just supposed to do it because cops be racist. Nah. And I'm saying that as someone who doesn't trust the cops. I'm not just going to jump to that conclusion in a single incident without something to show that's what happened. The funny thing is, someone already made this scene and did it better. Zootopia. I'll link to the scene below, cause Disney will totally block it if I use clips. It's a scene on a gondola where Nick tells Hops about joining the Junior Ranger Scouts as a kid. That's all he ever wanted to be, even if he would be the only predator, the only fox in the group. His mother scraped together the money for a new uniform, he goes to meet the other boys to join the pack, they're all prey animals, and he takes the oath, promising to be brave, loyal, and trustworthy. And one of the boys says, "Even for a fox?" Then they punch him, and he cries, "What did I do wrong? What did I do?" And they put a muzzle on him. The boy says, "If you thought we'd ever trust a fox without a muzzle, you're even dumber than you look." Nick runs out, pulls the muzzle off, and cries. It's a brilliant scene and is better than Jib Cody's short film for many reasons. Like I said on Twitter, 1, it shows how horrible it is to prejudge someone. They're not judging Nick by what he's done, they're judging him by someone else's action, based purely on the fact that they are the same species. That's the clearest form of bigotry, and Zootopia plays on this so well because the animals appear to be coded based on whites versus minorities, but not in the way you think. In Zootopia, the predators once ruled, but now the prey animals run things, while the predators are seen as dodgy, dangerous, and potential threats. The filmmakers are very slick about this by associating personalities with animal traits. Nick is a fox, so he's very sly. Hops is a rabbit, so she's bouncy. But as the film goes on, we see there's more to everyone's personalities. They can even be the opposite of what you'd expect. That leads to my second point. Even the so-called privileged can be oppressed, because in the world of Zootopia, the predator animals are technically the white people. Watch the movie. Really pay attention. The prey aren't white people. That's too obvious and it wouldn't fly because the prey have a legit reason to be afraid, and I don't think anyone at Disney would dare present minorities as threats. And this basic element set off all the Wakandans loving Jib Cody's work. If the prey animals are the minorities, then not only are the minorities the antagonists in the film and try to set up the predators, but they're also bigots and oppressors. They're the ones in the wrong, even though we would normally see them as victims. And that's the brilliance of Zootopia. It inverts the situation and averts your expectations by showing both sides can harbor unfair biases. Now, people got upset because I said Zootopia did it better and claimed I was shitting on Jib Cody's work. But I never mentioned the animation. I only mentioned the message because the message is the problem. Zootopia lays out exactly what happens, exactly why it's wrong, and exactly what impact it has. Cody's short gives you a scene and expects the viewer to fill in the context. It's so vague that without the viewer filling in the gaps, there's no reason to think anything happened other than two people staring awkwardly at each other. That's poor storytelling, and getting mad that I pointed out a better example doesn't change that. Of course, Zootopia was already making the rounds, so some woke SJW took to Twitter to woke-explain why Zootopia is a bad example. He says, quote, "Race is a social construct based on physical appearances and culture. It was invented by Europeans to establish white supremacy, which is why the definition of whiteness changes to keep their majority. Example, Irish people weren't considered white until recent history." Everything you just said is wrong. The concept of race pre-existed Europe by millennia. You can trace race and ethnic conflicts back to Sumer. What you're seeing here is how far the wokeness goes. This is someone literally making shit up to fit a narrative, despite decades of archaeology proving them wrong. Then he says, quote, "But different animals have significant genetic differences, which is different than cultural backgrounds. This reinforces a racist myth that race is biological." Except race is biological. This is how we can determine ancestry based on your DNA. We can see this with biracial children. Clearly there are physical differences between racial groups. That doesn't make us any less human, but it's insane to think it doesn't happen. "There is not a clear oppressor. Predators are a minority population, but have privilege, which could have been metaphors for colonialism, such as apartheid, except the victims of discrimination were the predators, and the prey was the villain." Yeah, it's almost like the filmmakers were making a point about how the oppressed can become oppressors. So in comparison to racism, where there's clearly a thing called white privilege, Zootopia either makes an argument that white privilege isn't real, or worse, neglects to acknowledge it in a metaphor for racism. Any media discussing racism without white supremacy is flawed. The sheer amount of illogical arguments packed into 220 characters is staggering. Baby, there's no such thing as white privilege. If there were, white people would never be poor, never go to jail, or have to marry Karens. Just wouldn't happen. Zootopia isn't propaganda, so it's not going to resort to your propagandist positions. It's a metaphor for all bigotry, not just racism. The inability to see past race lies with you, not the filmmakers. The stereotypes are true. Sloths are slow. Predators have eaten prey. So there's logical reason to judge people by species, as opposed to stereotypes like black people are thieves, which is not justified. My fox neighbor can possibly eat me. Also, what do they eat? Most stereotypes are based on small truths. White people are racist comes from some white people being racist. Black people are thieves comes from some black people stealing. Asians are smart comes from some Asians scoring high grades. Stereotypes don't come from nowhere. They're exaggerations of the truth, but that misses Zootopia's point. The film's point is that people can defy those stereotypes. Sloths are slow, physically slow. They're mentally very intelligent. Predators used to eat prey. They don't anymore. That's the point. People change. People can defy their nature. People can be wrong about other people's nature. Allow predators are victims in the main plot overall. The prey are the marginalized majority population, which is why Hops is a token. Yet a prey was the instigator of the race war, which makes an argument for the threat of POC uprising? Clearly, you didn't pay attention. The underlying fear in Zootopia is that the predators will go back to their old ways. When that begins to happen, the prey respond by demanding the predators be removed and locked away. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the film, turns out that a prey animal, the sheep Mayor, who's clearly coded as black, manipulated the situation to get rid of the predators. This is basically what Black Lives Matter is doing right now to white people, trying to stoke white fear and outrage to get white people, especially white supremacists, to act. If they do, any violence against white people would be in self-defense. Of course, since most white people aren't racist, this hasn't worked really well. So BLM has turned to stoking black people's anger, which seems to result in black people wrecking their own shit, killing their own people, and occasionally targeting white people. It would appear the sheep had the more sensible plan. Imagine that. Like Hops deals with microaggressions all day, but also has her racist fox repellent. It makes racism a both sides thing when it's really not. It might as well say all lives matter. Interesting that you think saying all lives have value and all people should be treated equally is racist. Hops doesn't deal with microaggressions. She deals with real, open, and sometimes subtle bigotry. That she does the same thing to others is the point. Black people deal with real, open, and sometimes subtle bigotry. And as they've shown over the last 2 weeks, they also deal out a great deal of real, open, and sometimes not at all subtle bigotry. The moment you think, not me, it's totally fucking you. You're the bigot. It's cop propaganda. And police departments are one of the main institutions of racism. And during protests against police brutalities, recommending this buddy cop film is just, ew. I'll write 200 tickets before the noon. I've seen this floating around on Twitter. Someone said the same thing about a scene from Into the Spider-Verse with Miles and his father, who's a cop, and the person said, this didn't age well. It's not propaganda to show cops in a positive light. To argue that it is implies that cops are inherently bad or evil, which is just idiotic. And again, this is coming from a guy who doesn't trust cops. Police departments are not institutions of racism. We know this because there are cops in other countries, and they don't all behave the same way. And for fuck's sake, learn to take a joke. It's a joke that Hops tickets scores of illegally parked cars. It's meant to be funny, and that's obvious. Stop it. Well, Taylor, it doesn't matter if the metaphor isn't perfect, because kids can't understand the nuance of racism. This is only true for white kids. I swear to God, I am not making this up. Look at the fucking screen. This is real. Real. Someone actually tweeted this. This is only true for white kids. Racism doesn't wait for kids to grow up, and the average black child has a better understanding of racism than many white adults. Claiming that white kids don't see racism is ironically pretty damn racist. You don't know what white people experience, especially outside of the US, so assuming black kids have magical racism detectors while white kids are oblivious only reveals your bias, not theirs. The fact is that if you talk down to kids about racism, you dismiss and do a disservice to kids of color, but making their experiences somehow their fault too, and you fail to properly teach white kids to be responsible for their racism. Yes, kids can be racist too. Kids have a limited ability to understand complex problems, which is why we simplify things for them. In this case, we teach them prejudice is wrong. That's simple and clear, and they will apply it to everyone, not just black people. Acknowledging this doesn't erase black kids' experiences, but doing what you're doing does erase white kids' experiences. We know kids can be racist. Kids are simple, and they will judge things in a simple manner, kinda like you. That's why we teach them not to be bigots. Zootopia was written by white people to make white people feel comfortable about racism. As long as you don't treat everyone the same, then you're not accountable for racism, which is the epitome of performative allyship and shouldn't be anyone's model for equality. Spoken like a true racist. And now you've completely destroyed your credibility. Arguing that because it's written by white people the film's message is invalid shows that you have absolutely no intellectual integrity or honesty. You're simply racist and bigoted, and no one should listen to you. Unfortunately, Scores of white folks are prostrating themselves before people like Taylor and Jib Cody, trying very hard to prove something neither of them will ever accept, that you're not racist. They're never going to believe you. They're 2 seconds away from calling Bill de Blasio racist. The man is married to a radical black lesbian feminist and has 2 biracial kids. Racist. You can't win, you can't break even, and you can't get out the game. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.